Tonight, let us wander northward into the heart of the Baltic lands, where endless forests of pine and birch stretch like a green ocean beneath the stars. Here, winter nights are long, and the air carries the scent of smoke and resin. In one small village, hidden by the bends of the river Niemen, a farmer lights his fire against the darkness. The flame flickers. But behind it lies a story older than memory, a story of how these quiet woods gave birth to an empire. The Lithuanians were once a people of the forest, bound by rivers and seasons. They hunted in silence, raised their fields of rye, and prayed beneath sacred groves to gods of thunder and sun. Their world was narrow, yet their spirit was unbroken. Against the cold, they built warmth. Against the vastness of nature, they found resilience. Few in those early days could have imagined what would come, for from these scattered tribes, a Grand Duchy would rise. It would grow to stretch from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, one of the largest states in medieval Europe. It would stand at the crossroads of civilizations, balancing between East and West, between pagan ritual and Christian faith. And yet, every fire must face the wind. Lithuania's story is one of sudden ascents and inevitable trials, of wars against crusading knights, of alliances sealed by marriage, of triumph on the battlefield and decline under foreign powers. It is the story of how a nation too often overlooked in the chronicles of Europe became, for a time, its quiet giant. So, as the firelight fades and the forest whispers lull you to rest, listen closely. Tonight we will follow the rise and fall of the Lithuanian civilization, a tale carried by the wind through pine and birch, a memory of a people who would not disappear, even when their land was taken away. In the beginning, Lithuania was not a kingdom, nor even a duchy, but a wilderness. The Baltic world was shaped not by stone cathedrals or marble forums, but by rivers, marshes, and endless forests. Pines whispered with the wind, oaks stood as silent guardians, and birch groves gleamed white beneath the moon. To live here was to bend with the rhythm of nature, to yield and resist in equal measure. The first Lithuanians were not builders of empires, but hunters, gatherers, and farmers who coaxed life from a harsh climate. They grew rye and barley in small clearings carved from the woods. They fished the rivers and set traps in the snow for elk and boar. Their homes were wooden huts, thatched with reeds, smoky with the scent of hearth fires. To the outsider, their world seemed remote, almost primitive, but within it lay a deep strength, the kind born of patience and endurance. Religion, for these forest people, was not an institution but a landscape. They worshipped Perkūnas, the god of thunder, whose rumble echoed in summer storms. They honored Sorli, the sun goddess, whose warmth returned after bitter winters. Sacred groves were their temples, oak trees were their altars. Fire was more than a tool for survival. It was a living spirit, guarded by families from generation to generation. To extinguish the flame was a sin, for fire was the thread that tied them to the gods. Their society was tribal, bound by kinship. Chiefs ruled small communities, leading in war and feast, protecting the harvest and the herds. Warriors were not armored knights, but men armed with spears, bows, and axes. Their defense was not stone walls, but the forest itself, dense, confusing, impenetrable to strangers. To outsiders, the Baltic land seemed a maze of rivers and bogs, where armies could vanish and supply lines collapse. It was here that Lithuanians learned the art of endurance, the patience to wait in shadows, and the courage to strike at the right moment. Contact with the outside world came slowly. Traders arrived from distant ports along the Baltic Sea, bringing salt, furs, and amber, the gold of the north. Amber, washed from ancient shores, became their first link to wider Europe, prized in markets from the Rhine to the Mediterranean. Yet, despite these exchanges, the Lithuanians remained largely unknown, written about by outsiders only as vague heathens hidden in northern forests. Still, change was stirring. To the south, the Slavic principalities of Kiev and Rus had begun to rise, their cities lit with domes and their princes armoured in Byzantine splendour. To the west, German merchants and warriors pushed deeper into the Baltic frontier. These neighbours saw the Lithuanians not merely as traders, but as souls to be converted, lands to be claimed. And yet, the Lithuanians were not defenceless. Their pagan faith gave them unity, their forests gave them sanctuary. The harshness of their land produced resilience. In the silence of the woods, they nurtured a spirit that neither Rus prince nor German knight could easily break. This spirit was not one of conquest, but of survival, and from survival, in time, would come ambition. By the 12th century, whispers of Lithuania had begun to spread. Chroniclers noted their raids into neighbouring lands, swift attacks that vanished back into the trees. Travellers spoke of fierce warriors who refused baptism, who clung stubbornly to the old gods, while Europe turned to the cross. Priests and monks called them pagans, but among themselves, they were simply Lietuvii, the people of the land. This tension between the pagan forest world and the expanding Christian frontier would define Lithuania's destiny. For as missionaries and crusaders sharpened their swords and prepared their sermons, the Lithuanians faced a choice: remain scattered tribes at the mercy of outsiders, or unite into something greater. For now, though, they remained children of the forest. Nights were lit by sacred fires, mornings by the call of cranes over the marshes. Villages huddled close for warmth. Families passed down songs and tales, and warriors sharpened their axes in silence. Lithuania had not yet entered the stage of European history, but the curtain was rising. In those quiet centuries, no one could foresee that from these woods would emerge the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a power that would stretch across half a continent. No one could imagine that these humble villagers, worshipping thunder and sun, would one day defeat crusading knights and shape the balance of Europe. But history often grows from the soil of obscurity, and in Lithuania's case, the seeds of empire lay deep in the forest floor, waiting for their season to rise. In the 13th century, the scattered forest tribes of Lithuania faced a choice: remain divided and vulnerable, or unite into a force that could withstand the storm gathering around them. To the west, the Teutonic and Livonian orders, militant monks clad in steel, marched under the sign of the cross. determined to convert or destroy every pagan stronghold they encountered. To the east, the principalities of Rus, weakened by Mongol invasions, still cast long shadows with their fortified cities and ancient faith, and in the midst of this tension, a man named Mindaugas emerged. Mindaugas was not the first to dream of unity, but he was the first to achieve it. A chieftain of noble lineage, he used both cunning and strength to consolidate rival clans. Some he persuaded with gifts, others with alliances, and still others he subdued with force of arms. Slowly, a patchwork of tribal lands was stitched into a broader realm. By 1236, Lithuania had begun to appear on European maps, not as nameless forests, but as a duchy, a rising power among nations. It was not a peaceful birth. Civil war, betrayal, and vengeance accompanied Mindaugas's rise. He fought against his own kin, against restless nobles who feared the loss of their independence. Yet, he understood something. His rivals did not. Survival required scale. No longer could Lithuania afford to be a collection of villages lost among the trees, surrounded by ambitious powers. It needed to become a state. In 1251, Mindaugas made his boldest move. Seeking protection against the crusading orders, he agreed to be baptized as a Christian, aligning himself with Rome. 2 years later, in 1253, he was crowned King of Lithuania, the only Lithuanian ruler ever to bear that title formally. In a ceremony sanctioned by the Pope, the once pagan chieftain became a monarch recognized by Europe. For the first time, Lithuania had entered the official chronicles of Christendom, and yet the crown did not erase the forest within. Mindaugas may have worn Christian robes, but many of his people clung to the old gods. Paganism was not easily uprooted from groves and hearths. The land remained divided between those who saw the future in baptism and those who swore by Perkūnas, the Thunderer. This tension would haunt Lithuania for generations, shaping its politics, its wars, and its very identity. Still, the transformation had begun. With Mindaugas at the helm, Lithuania expanded beyond its heartland. Armies marched eastward into the fractured lands of Rus, seizing towns along the Neman and Dnieper. Warriors carried their axes not only to defend their borders, but to project power far beyond them. By the late 13th century, Lithuania was no longer a peripheral pagan land. It was becoming a regional power, capable of negotiating with popes, princes, and kings. Mindaugas's reign, however, was fragile. His conversion angered many pagan nobles. His alliances bred suspicion. By 1263, he was betrayed and assassinated by his own relatives. The crown he had forged slipped back into the dust. For a time, chaos returned. Dukes fought dukes. Cousins slew cousins, and foreign enemies pressed their advantage. Yet the idea of unity, once born, could not be killed. Mindaugas had lit a torch that others would carry. In the decades that followed, Lithuania's rulers, Tridonis, Vytenis, and eventually the great Gediminas, built upon his foundation. They learned from his mistakes, blending diplomacy with force, allowing pagan traditions to coexist with cautious gestures toward Christianity. step by step. The duchy endured, and with each trial, it grew stronger. By the end of the century, Lithuania had become something remarkable, the last great pagan state in Europe, and one of the most expansive realms of its time. From humble forest clearings, it now commanded vast territories stretching toward the steppes. Its rulers held their heads high among Europe's monarchs, not as subjects of conversion, but as sovereigns in their own right. The rise of the Grand Duchy was more than a political triumph, it was a statement of survival, against crusaders who declared them heathens, against princes who sought to claim their land. The Lithuanians had carved out a place in history. The wilderness had given birth to a state, and that state would set, in time, grow into an empire that rivaled any in medieval Europe. As the century closed, Europe could no longer dismiss Lithuania as a shadowed corner of the Baltic. It had a crown, a capital, and a destiny. The Grand Duchy had risen, and its story was only beginning. The 13th century was not an age of peace. While the Holy Land drew knights across seas in pursuit of Jerusalem, another crusade unfolded closer to home, one aimed not at deserts and minarets, but at forests and rivers. The Northern Crusades, sanctioned by the papacy, sought to convert the last pagans of Europe, and at the heart of this holy mission stood Lithuania. For the German crusading orders, the Teutonic Knights and their Livonian branch, the Baltic frontier was both a battlefield and a sacred cause. These militant monks marched under white cloaks stitched with black crosses, carrying both sword and scripture. To them, the Lithuanians were not simply neighbors, they were heathens whose very existence was an affront to Christendom. The conquest of Lithuania, they believed, would be as holy as the capture of Jerusalem. The wars that followed were brutal. Monasteries and castles rose along the frontier, built like claws sinking into pagan soil. From strongholds such as Riga and Königsberg, crusaders launched campaigns deep into Lithuanian territory. Their armies were disciplined, armored, and well supplied. They came not to raid, but to conquer, erecting stone fortresses wherever their banners stood. The Lithuanians, however, fought differently. They had no cathedrals to defend, no walled cities to hide behind. Their weapon was the forest itself. When knights advanced, Lithuanian warriors vanished into the trees, striking with ambushes, harassing supply lines, and melting back into marshes. At night, the sky glowed red with the fires of sudden raids. What the Crusaders called heathen cunning, the Lithuanians called survival. Yet survival came at a cost. Villages burned, families fled into the wilderness, and sacred groves were desecrated. Priests carried baptismal water as eagerly as knights carried steel, and entire communities were forced to choose between the old gods and the new faith. Some chiefs accepted conversion to save their lands. Others swore to Perkūnas that they would never bow, fighting until blood ran into the rivers. It was during these wars that Lithuania's identity hardened. Against the relentless pressure of the Crusaders, the tribes began to see themselves not just as scattered clans, but as one people. Pagan shrines became symbols of defiance, fires burning in resistance to the cross of the knights. The enemy's strength, paradoxically, gave Lithuania the unity it had long lacked. Occasionally, the Lithuanians struck back with astonishing force. Raiding parties crossed deep into Prussia and Livonia, torching castles and settlements. Captured knights were sacrificed in rituals to the gods, their blood seen as tribute to the powers of thunder and fire. Chroniclers in Europe recorded these acts with horror, calling them barbaric. But to the Lithuanians, it was war, in its most ancient form, an offering to the spirits who guarded their land. Still, the balance of power was uncertain. The knights had backing from Rome, from German princes, and from the wealth of merchants who dreamed of new trade routes. Lithuania, isolated and pagan, often fought alone. Its leaders had to calculate carefully when to make peace, when to strike, when to pretend loyalty to the cross, while secretly honoring the oak groves at night. The wars dragged on for generations. Sons inherited their fathers' battles. What began as a campaign of faith became a cycle of blood. The Teutonic Order believed it was building God's kingdom in the north. The Lithuanians believed they were defending the sacred soil of their ancestors. Neither side yielded, and the frontier became a wound carved deep into Europe. By the late 13th century, the conflict had forged Lithuania into something stronger than the Crusaders expected. Out of fire and hardship, a new political order emerged, led by dukes who realized that survival required more than bravery. They needed strategy, alliances, and the ability to play the Christian world against itself. Lithuania's endurance in the Northern Crusades would lay the foundation for the remarkable expansion that followed. And yet, the memory of those wars lingered. To be Lithuanian in this era was to live with constant threat, to measure life by the rhythm of raids and reprisals, to see faith itself turned into a battlefield. It was a crucible, and from its heat, the Grand Duchy was tempered. Pagan Lithuania, once thought doomed, they had not only survived the onslaught of Christendom, it had grown sharper, more unified, and more ambitious. The Northern Crusades had failed in their ultimate aim. The fire of Perkūnas still burned in the forests, and the people of Lithuania still whispered their ancient prayers. The knights had brought war, but in doing so, they had also brought Lithuania to the threshold of greatness. While the crusading knights pressed from the west, a different drama unfolded to the east. There, the great principalities of Rus, once vibrant with trade, faith, and fortified cities, had been shattered by the Mongol invasions. Kiev, once called the mother of Russian cities, lay in decline. Smolensk, Chernigov, and many others bent under the weight of tribute demanded by the Golden Horde. For Lithuania, this upheaval was not merely a threat, it was an opportunity. The Lithuanians had long fought to defend their forests, but now they began to march beyond them. What started as raids into weakened Rus's lands grew into conquest. Small towns along the upper Dnieper fell under Lithuanian sway. Villages accustomed to paying tribute to distant Khans discovered that new rulers, clad not in silk but in leather and iron, demanded allegiance. Lithuania, once on the defensive, was becoming an aggressor. Why did the Lithuanians succeed where others faltered? Geography offered an answer. From their base along the Neman and the forests of Aukštaityja, Lithuanian dukes could move swiftly through river corridors that linked north to south. Their warriors were lightly armed, accustomed to rapid marches and sudden ambushes against Mongol cavalry. They were cautious against fractured Rus's princes. They were relentless. Step by step, Lithuania inserted itself into the vacuum left by Mongol destruction. This expansion was not merely military. Lithuanian rulers showed a striking pragmatism. They allowed Orthodox Christians in newly conquered towns to keep their faith, their churches, and their traditions. Pagan dukes ruled over Orthodox subjects without forcing conversion. This tolerance was not born of generosity alone, it was strategy. By respecting local customs, Lithuanian leaders could secure loyalty while extending their reach. It was a striking contrast to the Teutonic Knights, who sought to erase old beliefs with fire and sword. By the early 14th century, Lithuania's dominion stretched across vast lands of present-day Belarus and Ukraine. Cities like Polotsk, Vitebsk, and Kiev fell under its influence. At its height, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania controlled an empire larger than any other in Europe, spanning from the Baltic Sea nearly to the Black Sea. What had begun as scattered forest tribes was now an imperial power, standing astride the great trade routes of the continent. But expansion carried risks. The farther Lithuania reached, the more diverse its subjects became: pagan Lithuanians, Orthodox Ruthenians, Catholic Germans, Jews, and Tatars all lived under the same banner. Diversity brought wealth and resilience, but also fragility. Could a pagan duchy truly hold together lands steeped in Christian faith and Byzantine heritage? The question would linger, testing every ruler who followed. Still, in those decades, the achievements were breathtaking. Lithuanian armies clashed not only with neighboring Rus's princes, but also with the Mongols themselves. Chronicles speak of Lithuanian dukes defying the Golden Horde, defeating its detachments in fierce battles across the steppe. In an age when most feared the Mongol yoke, Lithuania dared to resist it. This defiance enhanced its reputation, turning the Grand Duchy into both a refuge and a rallying point for Slavic lands weary of Mongol tribute. Yet expansion also drew envy. To the west, the Teutonic Order watched warily, hoping to crush pagan Lithuania before it grew too strong. To the south, Poland eyed both opportunity and rivalry. To the east, Moscow, once a minor principality, was rising, destined to challenge Lithuania for the legacy of Rus. The Grand Duchy stood at the center of a growing storm, but for the moment, it flourished. Forest warriors who once defended their groves now governed cities with stone walls and marketplaces. Dukes who once offered sacrifice to oak trees now minted coins and signed treaties. The transformation was astonishing. Lithuania had stepped beyond the role of a pagan frontier. It had become a great power of Europe. And yet, deep in the forests, sacred fires still burned. The old gods had not been forgotten. Paganism and pragmatism coexisted uneasily. But it was this very duality that allowed Lithuania to stretch so far, so fast. It was both ancient and modern, pagan and diplomatic, fierce and tolerant. That paradox, more than any army, explained its success. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania stood as a bridge between worlds. It was no longer merely a defender of the forest. It was a ruler of rivers and steppes, of cities and plains. The age of expansion had begun, and with it, Lithuania's claim to greatness. In the early 14th century, as Lithuania's reach stretched farther than ever before, it found a leader who could give shape to its vast ambitions. His name was Gediminas. For many Lithuanians, he is remembered not only as a ruler, but as a founder, a visionary who turned a loose confederation of tribes and conquests into a realm worthy of the title Grand Duchy. Under his guidance, Lithuania entered its Golden Age. Gediminas inherited a land both fragile and immense. Lithuania had grown quickly, but growth bred instability. Pagan Lithuanians ruled over Orthodox Ruthenians, steppe warriors, and merchants from distant lands. Enemies encircled them, the Teutonic Order to the west, the Golden Horde to the southeast, Poland to the south. To hold such a realm required more than the sword, it required wisdom, diplomacy, and a steady hand. Gediminas possessed all three. One of his first great acts was to establish a true capital. In the valleys of the Neris River, he built Vilnius, a city that would become the beating heart of Lithuania. At first, it was a fortress, wooden walls rising above the river bend, but, under Gediminas, it grew into a bustling center of trade, faith, and governance. Merchants came from Riga, Krakow, and even further afield, drawn by markets alive with furs, honey, wax, and amber. Gediminas understood that Lithuania could not flourish in isolation. To survive, it needed allies, and to gain allies, it needed to present itself as part of the European order. In letters written to the Pope and to cities across Germany, he declared Lithuania's openness to Christianity and to commerce. Some of these letters invited priests and artisans to settle in Vilnius, promising freedom and protection. To many, Gediminas seemed on the verge of leading his people into the Christian fold, and yet he never abandoned the old gods. Pagan temples still burned with sacred fire, and Perkūnas, the thunderer, remained honored in Lithuanian ritual. Gediminas walked a careful line, offering gestures to Christianity when it suited diplomacy, but refusing full conversion. In doing so, he kept his pagan nobles loyal, while ensuring that Europe could not dismiss Lithuania as wholly barbaric. It was a balancing act, and Gediminas performed it masterfully. On the battlefield, he proved equally capable. His armies clashed with the Teutonic Order again and again, sometimes in defeat, sometimes in victory, but always with resilience. Crusader chronicles describe him as a stubborn foe who refused to be crushed. At the same time, he expanded Lithuanian control deeper into Rus's territories, securing towns that brought wealth and manpower. His empire became not only vast, but durable, held together by both force and negotiation. Perhaps Gediminas's most enduring legacy, however, lay in the dynasty he founded. His sons and grandsons, Algirdas, Kęstutis, and later Vytautas, would carry Lithuania to even greater heights. In Gediminas, the Lithuanians found more than a duke. They found a patriarch whose bloodline would guide them for generations. The Gediminid dynasty would shape Eastern Europe for centuries. marrying into royal houses, ruling lands from Vilnius to Moscow, from Trakai to Kiev. At home, life under Gediminas carried a rare sense of stability. Villages prospered under the protection of fortified castles. Trade routes along the Neris and the Niemen bustled with activity. Artisans introduced new crafts. Merchants carried stories from distant lands. Pagan rituals continued beneath sacred groves. But alongside them rose churches for Christian settlers. It was a society layered with contradictions, yet bound together by the vision of its ruler. Foreigners who visited Vilnius during his reign described it as a city alive with diversity. Pagan shrines stood near Orthodox churches. Catholic chapels rose beside markets, and Jewish communities found space within its walls. Few realms in medieval Europe offered such coexistence. To some, it seemed a paradox. To Gediminas, it was strength. Diversity, managed wisely, became the glue of his empire. By the time of his death in 1341, Gediminas had transformed Lithuania. No longer a fragile frontier, it was a power recognized across Europe. Its capital stood firm, its dynasty secure, its borders stretching farther than any had dreamed. The old gods still burned in sacred fires, but their worshippers now ruled one of the greatest realms of the age. For Lithuania, the age of Gediminas was more than a chapter, it was a foundation. From his reign, the Grand Duchy emerged not merely as a survivor of crusades, but as a builder of cities, a master of diplomacy, and a guardian of identity. The forest people had found their king, and under him, they had carved their place in history. By the late 14th century, Lithuania had grown vast, but its strength was shadowed by danger. The Teutonic Knights still pressed hard from the west, building stone castles along the Baltic coast and calling on Christendom to join their holy war. To the east, the rising power of Moscow sought to inherit the mantle of Rus and expand under Orthodox banners. And within Lithuania itself, the tension between pagan tradition and Christian diplomacy had reached a breaking point. The moment of decision came with a young Grand Duke named Jogaila, born into the Gediminid dynasty. Jogaila inherited both power and peril. His armies could still raid deep into Rus's lands. But the Teutonic Knights grew ever stronger. Armed with European allies and papal blessing, Lithuania stood at a crossroads: continue resisting as the last great pagan state in Europe, or seek survival through conversion and alliance. Opportunity appeared from the south. In 1384, the throne of Poland stood open, offered to whomever would marry Queen Jadwiga, a young monarch ruling a powerful but threatened kingdom. For Jogaila, it was a chance unlike any before. By marrying Jadwiga, he could unite two realms, creating a vast federation that stretched from the Baltic to the Carpathians. But there was a price. The marriage required Jogaila to accept baptism, to renounce the pagan gods of his ancestors, and to lead all Lithuania into Christianity. It was not merely a personal act, it was the end of centuries of resistance, the moment when sacred fires would be doused, when the thunder god, Perkūnas, would give way to the cross. For many Lithuanians, it felt like betrayal. For others, it was the only path forward. In 1385, at Kriwo, Jogaila agreed, the Union of Crego bound Poland and Lithuania together. Sealed by faith and matrimony, Jogaila became Władysław Tudegin Jagiełło, King of Poland, while remaining Grand Duke of Lithuania. With his baptism, Lithuania officially entered the Christian world, closing the chapter of Europe's last pagan empire. But the conversion was neither simple nor peaceful. Villagers who had prayed in oak groves for generations now watched churches rise on sacred ground. Priests preached salvation, yet many peasants whispered old prayers in secret. Pagan nobles resented the change, their loyalty to Jogaila uncertain. Even among Christians, tensions brewed between Catholic Poles and Orthodox Ruthenians. The union promised strength, but it also sowed division. And yet, the gamble carried rewards. United with Poland, Lithuania gained a powerful ally against the Teutonic Knights. Together, the two kingdoms commanded immense armies, wealth, and influence. For the first time, the crusading order faced an opponent equal to its might. Across Europe, whispers spread that a great clash was coming, one that would decide the fate of the Baltic. Jogaila himself remained a figure of contradiction. To Poles, he was a king who brought Lithuania into the light of Christianity. To Lithuanians, he was both savior and traitor, a man who traded the gods of the forest for a crown. His reign embodied the paradox of Lithuania itself, pagan yet Christian, Eastern yet Western, a nation caught between two worlds. The Union of Crego did not end Lithuania's struggles, it transformed them. Instead of fighting alone, Lithuania now shared its fate with Poland. Instead of resisting the Christian world, it sought to lead within it. But unity came at a cost, and not all were willing to pay. The stage was set for triumphs and betrayals, for victories that would echo across Europe and divisions that would erode from within. In the years ahead, this fragile union would be tested in fire. The Teutonic Knights, furious at Lithuania's conversion, sharpened their swords for war. Poland rallied its knights, Lithuania summoned its forest warriors. All paths pointed toward a single battlefield, where the future of the Baltic would be decided. That battlefield would be Grunwald. In the summer of 1410, the long tension between Lithuania, Poland, and the Teutonic Order finally erupted into a storm. For more than a century, crusading knights had sought to crush Lithuania, to baptize its forests with blood and fire. Now, under the Union of Crego, Lithuania and Poland stood together, their armies united under one banner. The stage was set for one of the greatest battles of medieval Europe, the Battle of Grunwald. The Teutonic Knights prepared with confidence. From their castles in Prussia, they summoned allies from across Europe, knights from Germany, France, and Bohemia, even mercenaries from distant lands. They marched beneath banners stitched with black crosses, their steel armor gleaming in the sun. At their head rode Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, certain that God's favor was with his order. Opposite them stood an army unlike any the knights had ever faced. Jogaila, now King of Poland, led tens of thousands of men, Polish knights, Lithuanian warriors, and allies from Ruthenia and Tatars of the steppe. Beside him rode his cousin Vytautas, Grand Duke of Lithuania, a commander of fiery courage. Where the knights trusted in discipline and armor, Jogaila and Vytautas trusted in numbers, diversity, and determination. The battlefield stretched wide across the plains near the villages of Grunwald and Tannenberg. Under a hot July sun, two vast hosts faced one another. Chroniclers wrote that the banners fluttered like a forest in the wind, each standard marking a company of men sworn to fight to the death. Priests on both sides blessed their armies, each convinced that heaven would grant them victory. When battle was joined, it was Lithuania that struck first. Vytautas unleashed his cavalry against the Teutonic lines, their light horsemen darting in and out, showering arrows before wheeling away. For hours they clashed, retreating in feigned disorder, drawing the knights deeper across the field. Some chronicles claim that many Lithuanians truly fled, their pagan roots blamed for cowardice, but whether planned or desperate, their withdrawal stretched the Teutonic ranks thin. Then the tide shifted. Polish knights under Jogaila surged forward, colliding with the Teutonic heavy cavalry in a thunderous crash of lances and steel. The battle raged in brutal waves, banners falling, trumpets sounding, men locked in combat beneath the sweltering sky. At its height, Grandmaster Ulrich himself led a charge, his white cloak flowing as he sought to break the enemy center. But in the chaos, he was struck down, his body trampled beneath the melee, with their leader slain. The resolve of the Teutonic order faltered. Lithuanian cavalry, rallied once more by Vytautas, swept back onto the field, striking the exhausted knights from the flank. Surrounded, outnumbered, and leaderless, the proud crusaders crumbled. By nightfall, their army was shattered, their banners captured, their power broken. The victory at Grunwald was total. Chroniclers say that the battlefield was carpeted with fallen knights, their armor gleaming beneath the blood-red sunset. For the Teutonic order, it was the beginning of decline. Never again would they command the fear that once stretched across Europe. For Lithuania and Poland, it was a moment of triumph, a vindication of their union and their defiance. And yet, victory did not bring peace. Though the Teutonic order was humbled, its fortresses remained formidable, and its influence lingered. Lithuania and Poland would continue to struggle against its remnants for decades. But Grunwald changed the balance of power. No longer was Lithuania a hunted pagan outpost. It was a Christian kingdom, allied with Poland, capable of defeating Europe's most feared crusading order. For Lithuanians, Grunwald became more than a battle. It was a symbol. It marked the moment when their nation, once dismissed as heathen tribes, stood equal among the powers of Europe. Songs and chronicles preserved the memory, painting Vytautas as a hero, Jogaila as a king blessed with destiny. Even centuries later, in times of hardship, Lithuanians would look back to Grunwald as proof that they could prevail against overwhelming odds. And yet, within the triumph lay seeds of tension. Poland and Lithuania had fought side by side, but their union was uneasy. Poles expected gratitude, Lithuanians feared domination. Pagan customs still lingered. Orthodoxy still shaped the East. and Catholic influence grew stronger. Unity had won the battle, but unity itself was fragile. As the fields of Grunwald grew silent, scattered with broken swords and fallen banners, the future of Lithuania seemed bright. But history seldom rests in triumph. Even as the fires of victory burned, shadows lengthened. The Grand Duchy would face new challenges, not from crusading knights, but from within its own alliance. The victory at Grunwald in 1410 should have secured Lithuania and Poland a golden century. The Teutonic order lay humbled, its power broken on the fields where banners once fluttered in pride. Europe acknowledged the strength of the Polish-Lithuanian alliance. But history, like a river, rarely flows as expected. Triumph gave way not to unity, but to tension, and from tension came decline. At the heart of this decline was the growing power of the nobility. In both Poland and Lithuania, nobles demanded privileges in exchange for their loyalty. Kings and Grand Dukes, eager to maintain support, granted charters and liberties that slowly eroded central authority. What had once been a realm held together by the vision of rulers like Gediminas or the strength of Vytautas now risked fragmentation under the weight of aristocratic ambition. Lithuania, in particular, faced challenges of diversity. Its empire stretched across vast lands of Ruthenia, home to millions of Orthodox Christians. The union with Poland had officially baptized Lithuania into Catholicism, but Orthodoxy remained deeply rooted in its eastern territories. Nobles in Vilnius leaned west toward Catholic Europe. Nobles in Kiev looked east toward Moscow. The Grand Duchy balanced precariously between two faiths, two cultures, two destinies. The reign of Vytautas the Great, cousin of Jogaila, offered a final moment of brilliance. Vytautas expanded Lithuanian power eastward, challenged the Golden Horde, and reorganized the state with discipline. Under him, Lithuania stood tall, respected across Europe. But when he died in 1430, the unity he embodied died with him. The throne became contested. Rival nobles quarreled, and foreign powers saw their chance. Poland pressed hardest. Though bound by union, Polish kings increasingly sought to dominate Lithuanian affairs. To many Lithuanians, this felt less like alliance and more like subjugation. Lithuanian nobles, determined to protect their independence, resisted but often at the expense of internal unity. Instead of standing as one, they fractured into competing factions, each aligning with Poland, Moscow, or their own ambitions. This division was worsened by the rise of the Polish concept of golden liberty. In Poland, the nobility gained extraordinary rights, including the power to elect kings and block royal decrees. Over time, these privileges spread into Lithuania as well. What sounded like freedom for the aristocracy was in fact a weakening of the state. Kings and Grand Dukes could no longer govern decisively. Every law, every alliance, every tax became hostage to noble approval. The realm that had defeated crusading knights now found itself shackled by its own elite. Meanwhile, threats multiplied. To the north, the remnants of the Teutonic order, though weakened, still controlled strong fortresses. To the east, Moscow was rising swiftly. uniting Rus under its rule and claiming the legacy of orthodoxy. To the south, the Ottoman Turks expanded, pressing into Europe with relentless force. Surrounded by ambitious neighbors, Lithuania needed unity more than ever. Yet instead, it drifted. Peasants bore the heaviest weight. As noble privileges grew, so did serfdom. Villagers who once tilled their fields freely now found themselves bound to the land, obligated to serve lords who cared more for wealth than loyalty to the realm. Discontent smoldered in silence, a quiet suffering that drained the spirit of the countryside. Culturally, the Age of Decline was paradoxical. On one hand, Vilnius flourished as a center of learning and faith. Churches and monasteries multiplied, and the written word spread more widely. On the other hand, the nobility's obsession with privilege stifled reform. Innovation was slow, and the gap between elite and commoner grew ever wider. Diplomacy, once Lithuania's strength, also faltered. The Grand Duchy had long survived by balancing alliances, shifting between east and west as needed, but by the 15th and 16th centuries, that balance became harder to maintain. Moscow demanded allegiance from Orthodox subjects, portraying itself as their protector. Poland demanded loyalty from Catholic nobles, portraying itself as Lithuania's partner. In between stood the Grand Dukes, stretched thin, struggling to please both sides and satisfying neither. The seeds of decline were sown not in defeat on the battlefield, but in slow erosion from within. Nobles grew powerful, peasants grew oppressed, unity grew fragile. The great empire built by Gediminas, Vytautas, and their heirs began to creak under its own weight. Lithuania remained vast, but its strength was hollowed. And yet, decline did not mean collapse, not yet. The Grand Duchy still commanded vast lands, still held powerful armies, still stood at the crossroads of Europe. But its greatness was no longer rising, it was balancing precariously. Like a flame flickering in the wind, the victory at Grunwald had promised a future of dominance. Instead, it marked the beginning of a slow, uneasy descent. Foreshadow of what lay ahead could already be seen. As nobles squabbled and peasants suffered, storms gathered beyond the borders. Moscow grew restless. Sweden and the Ottomans expanded. The once mighty Teutonic order transformed into a secular duchy under foreign kings. And Poland, bound to Lithuania, yet pulling it ever closer, would soon tighten its grip. The Age of Nobles was not the end of Lithuania, but it was the beginning of its decline. The golden fires of victory had cooled into embers, and those embers now smouldered in the hands of lords who thought more of privilege than of posterity. From this weakness would come new trials, and from those trials, the very survival of Lithuania would be tested. By the 17th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and its Polish partner stood as one of the largest states in Europe. On maps, their realm stretched impressively across plains, forests, and rivers, a vast expanse linking the Baltic to the Black Sea. Yet maps can deceive. Beneath the surface of grandeur, cracks widened, nobles quarreled, kings grew weak, peasants bore crushing burdens, and when storms gathered, the realm was unprepared. The first great storm came from the north. In 1655, Sweden unleashed its fury upon the Commonwealth in what history remembers as the Deluge. Armies of disciplined Swedish soldiers swept across Poland and Lithuania, capturing towns and fortresses with frightening speed. Vilnius itself, the proud capital, was occupied, its treasures looted, its churches desecrated. For Lithuanians, the shock was profound. The city, built by Gediminas, the jewel of their realm, lay in foreign hands. The Deluge was not merely a military invasion, it was a collapse of confidence. Nobles who should have rallied instead fled or made deals with the enemy. Peasants, long oppressed, sometimes welcomed invaders as liberators. The Swedish army, though foreign, seemed to many less cruel than the burden of their own lords. In this dark hour, the Commonwealth revealed its fragility. The privileges that had once been the pride of its nobles now paralyzed it, leaving the state unable to defend itself effectively. Yet Sweden was not the only predator. From the east, Muscovite armies advanced, eager to claim Ruthenian lands long contested with Lithuania. From the south, Cossack uprisings shook Ukraine, fueled by resentment against both Polish nobles and Catholic influence. What had once been a strong empire now found itself besieged on every front, a giant battered by foes who sensed its weakness. For Lithuanians, the 17th century was an age of fire. Villages burned, churches crumbled, and fields lay abandoned. Whole provinces were depopulated by war, famine, and plague. Chroniclers wrote of towns reduced to ashes, of families wandering homeless across the countryside, of lands once fertile left to wilderness. The Grand Duchy, once the shield of the East, now seemed unable to shield even itself. Still, resilience flickered, armies regrouped, alliances shifted, and slowly the invaders were pushed back. Sweden eventually retreated. Muscovy was checked, and the Commonwealth survived. But survival came at a terrible cost. The realm that emerged from the Deluge was not the same as the one that entered it. It was poorer, weaker, and more dependent on the fragile balance of its nobles. The 18th century brought no relief. As Europe moved into a new age of centralized monarchies, France under Louis XIV, Prussia under Frederick the Great, Russia under Peter the Great, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth seemed frozen in an earlier era. Its kings remained elected. Its nobles clung to their liberties, and its government remained paralyzed by the infamous liberum veto, which allowed any single noble to block legislation. What had once been hailed as freedom became paralysis. For Lithuania, the consequences were dire. Once the master of vast eastern lands, it now found its borders shrinking as Moscow, reborn as the Russian Empire, pressed ever harder. The balance of faith shifted too. Orthodox subjects looked to the Tsar as protector, while Catholic nobles leaned toward Poland. Identity blurred. Sovereignty weakened. The proud Grand Duchy was fading into shadow. The final blow came not from a single war, but from a series of political dissections known as the Partitions of Poland. In 1772, Joszan, and finally 1795. The Commonwealth was carved apart by its neighbors, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Piece by piece, its lands were taken, its independence erased. For Lithuania, this was not just loss of territory, it was erasure. The state that had once stretched from Baltic to Black Sea vanished from the map. Vilnius fell under Russian rule. Lithuanian nobles swore allegiance to foreign emperors. Peasants continued their toil. But now, under new masters, songs and stories remembered the old days of Gediminas, Vytautas, and Grunwald. But these were memories, not realities. The Grand Duchy, once Europe's quiet giant, had been swallowed by empires. And yet, even in this darkness, something endured. The Lithuanian language, long suppressed by elites who spoke Polish or Ruthenian, survived among peasants. Folk songs carried memory. Rituals preserved fragments of pagan heritage, and the spirit of independence lingered like an ember. Though erased from maps, Lithuania lived on in the hearts of its people. The Deluge had shown how fragile the Commonwealth truly was. The Partitions proved its doom. But history is not only written in victories or defeats, it is written in endurance. And the endurance of Lithuania, though tested by centuries of loss, would one day lead to rebirth. When the partitions of the 18th century erased Lithuania from the map, it seemed the long story of the Grand Duchy had ended. No capital, no crown, no banner fluttering above its fields. The once great realm that had stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea was swallowed by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. To many observers in Europe, Lithuania had become a relic of the past, a name in chronicles rather than a living nation. Yet nations are not only borders on maps, they are memories, languages, songs whispered at night, and in these, Lithuania survived. In the villages scattered across forests and valleys, peasants continued to speak Lithuanian, a tongue ancient and melodic, one of the oldest in the Indo-European family. While nobles often adopted Polish or Russian to curry favor with rulers, the common people preserved their mother speech. They sang dinos, folk songs that carried fragments of history, myth, and love. In these melodies, the memory of Perkūnas, Sorle, and the old gods still lingered, woven into everyday life. Religion, too, became a vessel of survival. Though Catholicism had replaced pagan rituals centuries earlier, the church in Lithuania often stood as a guardian of identity. Priests taught not only prayers but also language, history, and dignity. Pilgrimages to shrines such as the Hill of Crosses became acts of both faith and defiance, silent reminders that the nation's spirit could not be erased. Oppression was heavy under Russian rule, especially in the 19th century. Lithuanian language and culture were suppressed. Books printed in Latin script were banned, censors sought to replace them with Russian texts, but Lithuanians resisted in quiet ways. The Knygnešiai, or book smugglers, carried forbidden Lithuanian books across borders, hiding them under clothes, in sacks of grain, in carts of firewood. To risk one's life for a book was to proclaim that identity mattered more than safety. Rebellions erupted too. In 1831 and again in 1863, Lithuanians joined Poles in uprisings against Russian domination. Though crushed, these revolts kept alive, the dream of freedom. Every fallen rebel became part of a story whispered to the next generation. Lithuania might be conquered, but it would not be broken. By the late 19th century, the age of national awakening swept across Europe, and Lithuania was no exception. Scholars, poets, and teachers began to collect folklore, to publish newspapers in secret, to speak openly of a Lithuanian nation reborn. Figures like Jonas Basanavičius, often called the patriarch of the nation, inspired a new generation to see themselves not as subjects of empire, but as heirs to Gediminas and Vytautas. Urbanization brought challenges but also opportunities. In Vilnius, Kaunas, and beyond, students and workers gathered in circles to discuss history, literature, and politics. They dreamed not of restoring a medieval duchy, but of creating a modern nation-state, one built on language, culture, and shared memory. In their vision, the forest fires of Perkūnas had not died. They had only smouldered, waiting for the right moment to blaze again. That moment came in the 20th century. As World War I tore apart empires, Lithuania declared independence in 1918. For the first time in more than a century, its name returned to maps. Its flag flew over its own cities. Its voice was heard among nations. Though this chapter lies beyond the medieval tale, it reveals the endurance of identity. The people who had once been dismissed as pagans of the forest proved capable of re-emerging as a sovereign nation in the modern age. Yet even before that rebirth, in the long centuries of silence, Lithuania had shown a unique resilience. Unlike many realms that vanished entirely, it endured through its culture. The Grand Duchy may have fallen, but the Lithuanian soul lived on in song, in language, in faith, in the stubborn memory of peasants and poets alike. Looking back, one sees a paradox. Lithuania's survival was not only the work of kings or armies, but of ordinary people, farmers who taught their children old songs, priests who preserved language, smugglers who risked their lives for books. The strength of the nation lay not in fortresses or crowns, but in the quiet persistence of memory. The story of Lithuania's survival is a reminder that history is not only written in capitals and treaties, it is also written in whispers by the hearth, in songs sung across fields, in the stubborn refusal to forget. Even when erased from maps, Lithuania remained alive, a testament to the power of identity. And so, as the 18th century closed and the 19th unfolded, Lithuania lived as both absence and presence gone in political power, yet alive in spirit, a nation of memory, waiting for the hour when history would call it once more to rise. Return, for a moment, to the forests where this story began. Pines still rise against the sky. Birches still gleam pale in the moonlight, and rivers still wind their way through meadows and marshes. Long ago, a farmer lit a fire in the darkness, a fragile flame that became the spark of a nation. That flame has flickered through centuries, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, sometimes nearly extinguished, but it has never gone out. Lithuania's history is one of contrasts, from pagan groves to Christian cathedrals, from tribal raids to vast empires, from the glory of Grunwald to the despair of Partitions. Few nations have risen so high, only to vanish from the map, and yet fewer still have returned, proving that identity can survive loss, that memory can endure conquest. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania was once the largest state in medieval Europe, its banners flying over forests, steppes, and cities. But even when those banners fell, the people remained. They preserved their language, their songs, their stubborn pride. They carried their nation not in fortresses or crowns, but in their hearts. And in the end, that proved stronger than steel or parchment. For history is not only the tale of kings and battles, it is also the quiet courage of villagers who whispered forbidden prayers, of book smugglers who risked their lives for language, of families who passed down stories by firelight. It is the endurance of ordinary people that made possible the rebirth of a nation once thought lost. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the forests of Lithuania once more. Hear the crackle of firewood in a village hearth, the distant call of cranes over the marsh, the low murmur of a song carried by wind. Imagine the voices of ancestors who lived through triumph and tragedy, who clung to their identity through centuries of storm. And remember this: no empire lasts forever, but no nation truly dies as long as its people remember who they are. Lithuania's story is proof. It is the story of a flame lit in darkness, carried through centuries, glowing still. So close your eyes, let the forest whispers guide you, and rest with the knowledge that even in the long night of history, there are embers that never fade, the embers of Lithuania,